Mhm.
Well, hello everyone in the University of Winnipeg land. My name is Fred Appel. I'm a member of the University of Winnipeg Alumni Council. I'm an alum. I graduated in 1985, and I'm very pleased to join you from the University of Winnipeg Alumni Council's remote office here in lovely bucolic Princeton, New Jersey. And welcome to another in our series of U of Winnipeg alumni speakers events. I welcome you to this webinar, and I have two very distinguished and interesting alums to introduce you to in just a moment. I'm very excited to speak to them about our topic, the value of a humanities liberal arts degree today. Just before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to take a few moments to let you know about a couple of upcoming events that you might find of interest, online events. So in this alumni speaker series, you see a new slide up on the screen. I am going to be in discussion with three very recent graduates of the University of Winnipeg who have been recipients of the McCall-McBain Scholarship. This is a relatively new scholarship that was instituted in 2019. And this is a scholarship that is modeled somewhat on the Rhodes Scholarship, which Commonwealth students, of course, can take at Oxford University in the UK. The McCall-McBain scholarships are for study at McGill University in Montreal, and they are for students going on to a master's degree or a professional degree, and the recipients are expected to be leaders in their chosen professions. I will be speaking with three recent recipients of the McCall-McBain scholarships, three very interesting young people: Cameron Adams, 2023 recipient; Sydney Leggett, a recipient from 2022, and a recipient in the first cohort of this scholarship, Josh Swain, in 2021. So that event, that webinar, will be at 7 p.m. Central Time, Winnipeg time, on Thursday, February the 22nd. There's one more event, webinar, that I want to alert you to. We don't have a slide for it. It's going to be a discussion between two fellow members of the U of Winnipeg Alumni Council. Dorothy Young is a member of our council, and she is a representative of the university's Board of Regents on the council. And she will be in discussion with Stefan Johansson. He is a member of the University of Winnipeg Board of Regents. He's been on our alumni council as well. And she will be discussing the topic of how universities prepare one for life, not just a vocation, a theme quite similar to what we will be discussing this evening. So I'll mention these events just as we're closing. If any of you out there in webinar land want more information, you could go to the University of Winnipeg alumni website. That's www.uwinnipeg.ca/alumni. So without further ado, I am very pleased to introduce my two conversation partners for this evening. I'm very pleased they're joining me. One is based, I guess, an hour or just a little over an hour away from me by car in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the other has remained in the motherland, based in Toronto. So let me begin with Warren Breckman. Who graduated with a Bachelor of Arts honors degree from the University of Winnipeg in 1986. Now, a year before he graduated, Warren was an inaugural recipient of the Sir William Stevenson Scholarship for Outstanding Academic Achievement and Superior Leadership Qualities. And in the year of his graduation, Warren was the Governor General Gold Medalist in History for the honors course, and a silver medalist for the second highest standing in the arts at the University of Winnipeg. Warren Breckman is currently the Sheldon and Lucy Hackney Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And there he teaches courses in modern European intellectual and cultural history. Warren is the author of a number of books, including a book entitled Marx, the Young Hegelians, and the Origins of Radical Social Theory. Thank you very much, Warren, for coming and to joining us this evening. And our second webinar conversation partner this evening is Karen Wiseman. Karen graduated with a BA honors from the University of Winnipeg in 1985, just a year before Warren's graduation, also the year of my graduation. And the year that Karen graduated, she received the Governor General's Gold Medal for highest standing in arts honors course. And she also received the University Gold Medal in English honors course. She is currently Professor of English at the University of Toronto, where she teaches courses in Romanticism, post-Romantic culture, and in Jewish studies. Karen Wiseman was elected to the Royal Society of Canada, and she is the author recently of a book entitled Singing in a Foreign Land, Anglo-Jewish Poetry, 1812 to 1847. So Karen and Warren, thank you both very much for joining me this evening. So the subject matter that's on the billing for our webinar is rather intimidatingly daunting and abstract and ambitious, and I'd like to creep up to it in stages. Since all three of us are alums, I guess I wanted to ask the two of you a couple of questions. First of all, about your own educational experiences at the University of Winnipeg. So, I mean, these days, I raised, children with my wife here in New Jersey, and in the early 2000s, my eyes were open at the plethora of university and college choices there are for aspiring students. So many choices, overwhelming numbers of choices. When I was growing up, and around the same time as you, the choices were much more constrained. I knew very few people in my high school who looked beyond Winnipeg and beyond Manitoba for their undergraduate education, their university education. It was, for me, a binary choice, or that's how it was presented to me anyway. There was the urban University of Winnipeg, there was the suburban, larger University of Manitoba. Was that true for the two of you, or were either of you tempted? Was it even within the range of possibility to go to university elsewhere? And I could ask either of you to jump in. It doesn't matter. Perhaps Karen, you'd like to start.
Sure. Yeah, it was certainly the norm within my cohort to stay in Winnipeg. The very odd person went elsewhere, but it really wasn't the common experience. One went to University of Winnipeg or University of Manitoba, and those who did otherwise were the outliers.
Yes, yeah. Was that your experience as well, Warren?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the University of Winnipeg had a direct bus line from my home, and it had a slightly hipper urban feel to it. But it literally never even occurred to me as a thought to go elsewhere.
Yes, yes.
And I teach at a university where every student who's at this university has gone, kind of agonized over the choices that you described, Fred.
Yes, yes.
Agonized over the admissions process, et cetera, et cetera. And at times I really envy the mindfulness and the intentionality of them. And at other times I really, really pity them for, just for the torture that they go through in order to arrive at college. And I think that a lot of it is, kind of overestimation of, whatever life-changing benefit they perceive in their choices.
as far as I can recall, there were two young guys in my high school graduating class who went elsewhere. One went to the University of Wisconsin, Madison, and that was so exotic and bizarre to think of. I mean, it just seemed like he just seemed like an exotic plant. But I quite agree. It was the same for me as well, that it was very much the norm. It sounds, Warren, like the commuting convenience and the hipper reputation or nature of the U of W was the clincher for you. What about for you, Karen? Did you wrestle with the question of where to go?
Not really. I also was drawn to the hip downtown prospects, and I don't regret it for a moment.
Yeah,
I should also say that my
yeah,
my grandfather graduated from uh, Wesley College.
Wesley
You know,
College.
my
Yeah.
both of my parents, my two sisters. You know, so there was a family tradition also.
Yes. I also, I mean, I went there as well, and of course, and I remember an older cousin of mine ended up going to the U of Winnipeg Collegiate, which was quite life-changing for him. That definitely helped to put the U of W on the radar for me as well. So let me ask you about some of your, shall we say, formative experiences at U of W. Maybe there's a particularly vivid memory you have of your time there. It could be a social memory, the memory of an extracurricular activity, a particular class that you took, a professor that made an impact on you. I just wanted to invite both of you to share
Mhm.
something about your time, something that stayed with you.
Well, I could jump in. I have
Yes,
very,
please.
very fond memories of an English professor, Professor Clem Wyke, with whom I studied Romanticism, which is my primary field of specialization now. And among the many reasons I remember him with so much fondness and so much respect, not only nostalgia, is that he modeled not only a very deep love and enthusiasm for literature, something that not all teachers of literature are keen to do, but he was unabashed in his love of literature, which he joined, of course, to a very clear and rigorous way of articulating what it is about the text that evokes so much love. And that has stayed with me and will stay with me forever. And in many ways, it's the basis of my own teaching philosophy to try and make coherent the claims texts have on us.
Mm-hmm. Aaron, was he or was that class intimidating initially? Was it forbidding, and it just took you a while to your get you gain your stride, get your confidence up?
I won't say that it was intimidating or forbidding. I think that Professor Wyke modeled enthusiasm so quickly and so immediately. It resonated with my own love of literature. And I think that really paved the way for a very smooth entry into the experience. It was a
Mm,
very warm, welcoming, not intimidating experience.
that's wonderful. What about you, Warren?
Well, first I want to say I've known Karen since she was a freshman, as we would say in the States. I don't think she was ever intimidated by anything. but so I also studied Romanticism, perhaps in the same class as you with Clem Wyke, and I remember all the virtues that you speak of. One of the memories that really has always stayed with me was actually my first year English literature survey course, you know, in the Big Norton anthology, and this was taught by a man named Walter Swayze,
Hmm.
and you know, for me, it was special because he had actually been my mother's English teacher back when she was at the college, and so you know, this was to me kind of mind blowing. You know,
Yeah.
like in retrospect, he had a long career. It's not that surprising. but it was actually in a class on Wordsworth. So back to Romanticism,
Yes.
and Professor Swayze really teared up. And it just at the time, you kind of like, you're too young to really see your professors as fully human. They're somehow immune to all the normal things. And that was another way of demonstrating the love that Karen just spoke of. And it really stuck with me. I had many great teachers at the university, and I would want to mention Michael McLean, who was teaching there just for maybe 5 or 6 years, but taught intellectual history, which is the field that I work in.
Mm-hmm.
And were it not for Michael, I don't know that I would have even known of this field at the time when I was making decisions. And he was always a very exciting teacher. It was always seminars. There was always a lot of intense discussion, and just huge moments of discovery, reading Marx and Hegel and Freud and so forth. And the other great teacher who I just will always cherish is Robert Young, who just taught modern European history, and kind of set standards of rigor, and kind of professional
Yes.
care and ambition, and the subject matter was really galvanizing to me. So there were, I could go on, but there were many
Yes.
many figures who really were meaningful.
It sounds like the two of you were moved and deeply influenced by professors teaching in fields that you eventually went into professionally, the two of you. And I guess that's no accident. And because I was thinking of asking the two of you about your choice of majors, and if either of you ever wrestled with what to do with the banquet of courses and subjects of study, if you were tempted to move in other directions or to double major or what have you. Was it clear from the beginning what you wanted to study, both of you?
It was somewhat clear to me. I was, I think, what used to be called a bookish kid, and
Mm-hmm.
I really did love to read a lot. And so I was pretty committed to my degree in English. I loved philosophy and took a number of courses, and in fact had the equivalent of a major in philosophy. But no, I stuck with my true love. It really was a true love, and I remain so grateful to the University of Winnipeg for being able to foster that kind of real appreciation and learn how to talk coherently about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought I would major in English, and in fact, I'm not even quite sure whether I have a double major. I might, but I certainly took almost as many English courses as I did history, and I
Yes.
think in the end, what drove me to history was this field of intellectual history where I could continue to read the kinds of books that I really love to read, and think about them with a mix of the kind of interpretive approaches
Yes.
that you find in a literature department, with a strong sensibility towards history. And so for me, that became a kind of clear path, and I guess I settled on that by maybe my third year at the University of Winnipeg.
Very interesting. Karen, I'm curious to find out if you had any women professors, either in, your study of English literature or in some other areas.
That's a good question, an interesting question. In fact, I did. Carolyn Hampel taught me Shakespeare. Marta
Hmm.
Gruner taught me American literature. And in many respects, they were pioneers in their field at the time. Now, we graduated in 1985. At the time, it was less common to have women
Yes.
professors. We take it for granted now, or students now
Yes.
certainly take it for granted. But yes,
Yes.
those were important and very, very worthwhile models for me.
I sometimes wonder if young women entering into a university program who have male professors surrounded by verbose young men, if sometimes it's a struggle to find one's voice in that circumstance. I mean, having someone who can model scholarship might be must have been very important.
It was very important. And, honestly, I don't remember a lot of difficulty trying to establish a voice vis-a-vis the dominance of men
Yes.
in the room. And I think that may have something to do with the kind of vibe we had at University of Winnipeg. Um,
Hmm.
I think there was a lot of mutual respect, certainly in the upper year seminar courses, which were discussion based. There was
Yes.
vigorous, lively discussion. And not a lot of intimidation.
Yes.
So I appreciate the question, and it was important to me that I had women models as
Hmm.
women professors as models, and that remains an important memory. But I
Hmm.
also think the university, perhaps this has something to do with the smaller size, perhaps the
Yes.
hip downtown context. But it really did foster an openness and inclusivity.
Hmm.
And I really do appreciate the way in which I was able to constitute a voice. And I hope that my memory that this was generally the case
Yeah.
for the majority of people is accurate.
I might have mentioned this to you when we had our informal get acquainted chat a week and a half ago, but uh, my most memorable professors were both women. There was
Mm.
Claudia Wright in the political science department who taught me political theory, and I found her rather forbidding as a persona. She was a very no nonsense individual, not mean, but uh, she was no nonsense, and I must say, a bit intimidated initially, but her standards were high. The quality, one really felt one had to bring one's A game, into her classroom. And Thelma Wright was someone else who also was very formative for me, who taught political theory. I'm I'm wondering now, um, if I'm curious to know if your paths were quite clear to you as you were graduating from the University of Winnipeg with all of those honors that I mentioned earlier that you were showered with. Was it quite clear that you both wanted to proceed into graduate study? Did either of you take any time away from university life to work, or was it straight to grad school? And if so, where? I mean, Warren, would you like to start this time?
Yeah, I, yeah, I didn't take any time off. I knew what I wanted to do. I had momentum. I took some time off in the course of my University of Winnipeg education to be a bartender in London. Kind of my
For a
version of.
year?
No, it was shorter than that, but it felt like a long time. It was a great experience, and it kind of broke some of the continuity and in a good way. Um, but I went straight to graduate school, and it was the right thing for me to do. And I also knew that eventually I'd have time to live abroad, doing research and this kind of thing. And I did. I lived in Berlin, and this was fantastic. I went to Berkeley.
UC
I went,
Berkeley.
yeah.
All right. How does a Winnipeg boy, studying at the University of Winnipeg, find out about the riches of the University of California, Berkeley, and make his way there?
Right. Well, first, I was fortunate enough to win a fellowship through the Mellon Foundation that allowed me
Mm.
to do that because the cost would have been prohibitive. Um, but I was like Karen. I was a voracious reader, and I had fallen in love with a certain school of philosophy and radical criticism known as the Frankfurt School, and the major historian of that movement was at Berkeley, and it just made
Mhm.
perfect sense to go to him, which is what I did.
Wonderful. And Karen, what about you? Any time tending bar at all for you?
Alas, no time tending bar.
Uh,
I don't have such an interesting bit of information in my personal history. No, I went to the University of Toronto for my master's and PhD. I worked with Milton Wilson, who was an eminent Shelleyan, and had a very good experience. During my MA, I thought that, I would use the year to decide whether I wanted to remain at University of Toronto or
mhm.
apply elsewhere. But I was actually very, very happy at the University of Toronto. I had taken a course with Milton Wilson and wanted him to supervise my PhD thesis, and the rest is history.
I remember I had maybe it was a brief email exchange with Warren when I first made contact with him after I joined the U of W Alumni Council. And, he mentioned that, he came to sort of appreciate the quality of the education he received at the University of Winnipeg when he was in his cohort of graduate students at Berkeley. And he looked around and thought, you know, I can more than hold my own with these people. And well, that had to do with him, but it also had to do with how he was how he was trained. I wonder if the two of you could comment a bit on how you felt your time at the U of W prepped you for being in a cohort among people, I guess, foreign students and people trained at some of the top private universities in the US and other, big public universities, the big universities in out east in Canada. I mean, Karen, do you have any thoughts on that?
My preparation was superb. They don't actually teach undergraduate literature courses like the one that I had. They
Mm,
were anymore, not anywhere, but my preparation was absolutely superb. I had a very, what even then might have been called an old-fashioned background in the history of English and American literature. I
mm-hmm,
had mandatory final exams in every course, every humanities course that I took. Um, and I had requirements to write long research essays in all of my senior courses. And it was a somewhat, traditional historical overview with various required courses in
mm-hmm,
um, canonical figures.
mm-hmm,
That served me remarkably well in graduate school when writing comprehensive exams, remarkably well in recognizing that I had all
mm-hmm,
kinds of background to pursue higher level, more advanced research once I got to graduate school. And, of course, there were students in the PhD program at the University of Toronto who had done their undergraduate degrees in any number of places from
mm-hmm,
throughout
mm-hmm,
North America and indeed Europe. And indeed, I could more, as Warren said, as you quoted Warren as saying, I could certainly more than hold my
mm-hmm,
own. I felt very, very confident in the background preparation I'd received at
mm-hmm.
University of Winnipeg.
I have read accounts of Canadian kids graduating from university in Canada, going abroad, and experiencing some intimidation. I remember there was a bit of that in Michael Ignatiev's memoir of his time in the UK. It sounds like Karen did not experience that, and Warren, I guess you didn't either.
Well, I you know, I don't know whether this is what you're referring to, but the very first seminar at Berkeley, it was a large seminar. It was a big European pro seminar, modern European history, and the professor went around the room and everybody introduced themselves, and Harvard, Yale, Oxford, Cambridge, etc., Winnipeg. And the professor then said something like, well, some of you come from great universities or something like this. And I was shrinking. And I'll tell you, 6 weeks later, I wrote a paper for him. He took me out for lunch to celebrate the paper, and that was that. And,
What a great story.
Great
yeah.
story.
And,
Wow.
and what I felt was really valuable, and, maybe this is also a way of kind of transitioning into some of the broader issues posed by this
Yes.
webinar, is that like Karen, I had the opportunity to do almost exclusively seminars, so that I was very used to a very active situation, discussion, building my own knowledge, really, and bringing it into the classroom. And then
Yes.
secondly, the heavy emphasis on writing,
Yes.
which I don't know what's going on in the universities in Canada at this point, but at a place like Penn, probably this is true at Princeton, students are not writing nearly as much as they used to, and these are skills that certainly served me well as I went into a writing and teaching career, but
Yes.
of course these are the kinds of skills that point to the larger value of the humanities, right?
Yes.
Speaking, writing, reading, making sense of what one reads. And those are transferable skills, whether one decides to go into graduate school in the humanities or not.
Yes. Yeah. I imagine the two of you are insisting on a lot of writing on the part of your students,
Yes.
undergraduate. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
only way to do it is to do it. The only way to learn to improve writing is to just buckle down and do it and
Yeah.
respond to critique.
Yeah. Now, what would the two of you say to, say, the parent, a worried or anxious parent of an incoming undergraduate student who is concerned when they learn that their son or daughter is strongly inclined to major in one of the humanities or liberal arts programs? Perhaps they're anxious or concerned because they've heard that the job prospects will be exceedingly narrow for them. Perhaps they have anecdotal evidence of the children of their friends who moved into a very technical major, computer science, say, or mathematics, and they've been well launched into a career. I mean, how does one respond to that type of anxiety?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Warren, would you like to go first?
Well, I think that there are two answers to that question, and they are distinct, but they also intertwine. One of the answers has to be something about the intrinsic value of a humanities education. I think that coming into contact with the history of human cultures, other human beings, building meaning, acting in the world, is mind expanding and builds empathy and
Yes.
understanding, and I think complex frameworks for understanding one's own value choices. And I don't think that the humanities solves the world's problems, but it can help us be more reflective about the choices that we're making,
Yes.
and also both perhaps accepting and empathetic towards other choices, but also critical of other choices, and to give us the actual apparatus for exercising the critical function. So that would be the intrinsic, let's call it the intrinsic reasons. I also think when I saw, I mentioned Walter Swayze weeping as we discussed Wordsworth, because it moved him, but it just didn't move him just in a kind of Hallmark card way. It moved him because it spoke to him as an elderly man who had probably read this Wordsworth poem dozens and dozens of times, and it probably meant something different or spoke to something different in each instance. And these, like, the humanities are a place where people exercise their passions as well as their
Yes.
intellects. So that, I think, is a really crucial dimension of
Yes.
this. I would like to circle back to the more instrumental or practical, but maybe, I don't want to go on too long. Maybe Karen, you want to weigh in.
Oh, I think you've articulated that beautifully, Warren. And I think the more practical point is worth making as well. I suspect you were going to say the same kind of thing that I'm about to say now, which is that the data show that, in fact, humanities graduates do get real jobs in the real world. There have been all kinds of quantitative studies about this, and humanities graduates tend to do very well. Um, uh, Corporations, businesses of all sorts value the critical thinking and writing skills that humanities graduates develop. And I don't think that a parent need worry about their child's ambitions to do a degree in the humanities. But of course, again, sticking just for now with the practical aspects, a humanities degree is a wonderful preparation for any number of professional qualifications, including law school. Many of my undergraduates lately have gone on to do a master's in public policy, the MPP. And from there, they go
Ah,
on to jobs in the civil service. I started
okay.
noticing this about 10 years ago. Not exactly sure why, but because I would have associated that kind of path initially with political science, perhaps, but a lot of English students were going on to do, because I was writing all kinds of letters of reference for MPP
Hmm.
programs, the Masters in Public Policy, also, of course, education. And so, as a first degree, a humanities degree is superb.
Yes.
And but also, just as a degree, as a launching pad toward a career in business, uh, the studies show humanities
Yes.
graduates do very well.
Yeah.
Karen, you mentioned quite a few of your students these days have been drawn towards public service and wanting to enroll in a master's of public service or public policy. I
Public
can't help
policy.
but mention that the last webinar that I chaired for this in this alumni speaker series was with two alums who went into public service after their liberal arts education. One became a deputy minister of education for the government of the Northwest Territories, and
Oh,
the
wow.
other retired recently after a long career in the government of Canada as a policy advisor for Indigenous affairs
Interesting.
to federal ministers. And so I, I do think, I mean, if we had them with us, I'm sure that they would echo what you were saying. Um, I guess the two of you have introduced two different, but as Warren said, intertwined reasons for the enduring importance of the liberal arts or the humanities. Warren referred to the first importance as intrinsic. It is a good in and of itself, and the other is more, shall we say, instrumental. It is something that can really prepare you for jobs. But I guess as we think about how important the humanities are intrinsically, I guess it's important, as you mentioned earlier, not to develop an overly sentimental view of the humanities, that it's just something very pretty for us to expose ourselves to.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Go ahead, Warren, please.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing that I think is important to is to puncture a certain myth about the humanities, and that myth would be something like the humanities stretch back into the distant mists of time, maybe even to antiquity. And there's always been this, this practice of reading and being enriched and having your character formed. Um, and then suddenly we get the hard sciences and business schools and practicality and utilitarianism and the humanities come under challenge. The real emergence of the humanities is not a 19th century story,
Mm,
and they emerge as disciplines. In other words, they don't just emerge as the other or the opposite of the rigorous sciences. They emerge as disciplines with rigorous practices of their own. So when we talk about the values of reading, of analyzing, of writing, like we're not interested in just in some ways exposing students to beautiful artifacts. We're interested in methods and
Yes.
disciplinary practices, and that's of course where the, let's call them, the soft skills of a humanities degree come out. It's not just by reading or some sort of osmosis with great cultural products. It's learning certain kinds of procedures.
Yes.
Reading, writing, managing information. Finding ways to express yourself both in written and oral form. So again, like I think, in fact, the humanities importance amplifies if we
Hmm.
demystify them and see them as part of a rigorous modern university landscape
Yes.
rather than the other of that landscape.
Absolutely. I'd like to echo Warren's views. I think it's important not to develop an overly sentimental, idealistic view of the humanities. The humanities and humanistic reading does not necessarily make us good. They don't
Hmm.
necessarily make us better moral beings. And furthermore, to echo Warren's point, they're not simply opportunities for us to indulge in undiluted pleasure over being exposed to beautiful artifacts, beautiful literature. Which of course leads to the question, well, so what are they good for? What do they do? And I really appreciated Warren's brief overview of the disciplinary aspects of the humanities emerging in the 19th century. It's very, very important for literature students, for example, um, to learn how to make coherent their readerly responses to a text. And this requires a lot of hard work. It requires technical knowledge of how and vocabulary of the kind of poem, the kind of genre, the kind of form. One needs to learn how to articulate the one needs to learn how to articulate what it is about a text that is meaningful. And you need more than superlatives
Hmm.
for that.
Or
You need,
invective, which,
yeah,
because I teach a lot of texts that are unsavory also.
right. Yes, right.
Yes, unsavory, meaning that exposure to them through your liberal arts education can be very disturbing and very unsettling because there's ugliness in our history. And I know that here in the United States, there are, it's very, very difficult for the humanities to get at public universities, especially. It's been very difficult lately for the humanities, uh, especially humanities courses that teach the underlying reality of the ugliness, the ugly sides of American history. Humanities scholars are under attack. Perhaps that's less so in Canada, uh, although, maybe not. But I guess that is important as well, is it not?
Oh, I think learning a vocabulary for engaging critically and meaningfully with the
Mm.
ugly
Yeah.
is absolutely crucial. One needs to know how to make articulate conversational points with others. We need to learn not simply how to articulate responses for the benefit of our own sense of communication, but we need to learn how to engage in meaningful ways with one another. And for that, you need to learn a critical
Yes.
vocabulary. You need to learn how to talk about even
Mm.
the ugly.
So Karen, speaking about language here and the need to develop, intelligible, structured, thoughtful ways of, talking about the material that's being assigned in class. If I were a skeptic standing outside of, a liberal arts program, and there are many skeptics, in this country of the United States. How do you respond to people who say these liberal arts professors, these humanities professors, sit in their ivory towers and they speak to each other and they speak to their students in these rarefied languages, and it's all sort of a mutual admiration society, and it has nothing to do with what's happening out there. The professors have a particular political spin on, the material they're teaching the students. The students are rewarding the professors by mimicking their rhetoric. And so it all becomes kind of insular and parochial. I mean, I don't believe this myself, but one hears this sort of thing time and time again. How would you respond? I mean, Warren, did you want to go first?
Well, I mean, first off, on the relevance question, so just to tell you what one of the things that I was up to today, I'm supervising our honors program this year, and so the honors in this case is a thesis writing. So the students will write 80 or 90-page theses, and they start in the spring semester of their third year and carry it over into their fourth year, and they produce really major works in history. So around the table there are 10 people. One person who is from Beijing is writing on the emergence of Chinese nationalism in the 1920s. Well, Chinese nationalism is threatening Taiwan at this very moment. A woman is writing on Barbie and gender. Now, obviously, she's inspired both by her childhood and by the
And
fad
the
for
movie.
Barbie. But she's studying gender in America and toys and
Yes.
so forth. Two people want to work on the decline of labor in the 1980s and 90s in America, like organized labor. One focused on the confrontation of Ronald Reagan with the air traffic controllers. A student who wants to work on old believing Russians. So these are not the Orthodox. These were people who ended up being persecuted by both imperial and communist Russia. Well, guess what? Those old believers are now part of the ideological apparatus of Vladimir Putin. So I could go on. I'm not going to rehearse all 10 projects, but these are not irrelevant projects. These are very engaged with contemporary issues, even though the present concern is leading them back in an articulate way, to pick up on the language of Karen, to reflect on deeper roots, deeper trajectories, deeper continuities or changes. And how else would you be able to approach these problems? The great poet Goethe once said, he who is without history is condemned to live like a child. Right? So, it seems to me that this is the very substance of what it means to be able to position oneself in a world of conflicting values, conflicting goals, and so on and so forth.
And literature,
it's hard to,
of course,
go ahead, Karen, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Fred.
Go ahead.
Literature, thank you. Literature models also a way in which poets of quite different and distinct ideological commitments, not just poets, prose writers as well, access fundamental questions drawn from the real political empirical world. And one of the things we do in literature is study the way in which over time different kinds of communities have tried to make sense to themselves and for the benefit of others, their experiences within a political social world. I think that one of the things that's important to note when you raise the specter of the critics of the
Mm,
humanities is that we need to find ways of addressing the echo chamber, which is sometimes predominant in different kinds of political communities. And
yes.
I think that a humanities degree provides students with vital tools to both understand an echo chamber and to learn how to address misconceptions,
Hmm.
misconstruals, or the insularity that is the ground of many echo chambers.
Hmm. I guess it's also important to stress that to make the case, whether it's an intrinsic case or an instrumental case, to make the case for the importance of the humanities need not involve denigrating the sciences, and it does not involve diminishing the importance of the people who specialize in branches of the natural science.
Absolutely, definitely. One of my kids is preparing for graduate school in mathematics, so I've had a bit of a window into the remarkable rigor that is mobilized in the study of mathematics. What one derives from the humanities is similar from what one derives from the sciences, which is a
Hmm.
commitment to rigor,
Yes.
commitment to disseminating results,
Hmm.
sharing information, but also how to interpret results, how to interpret information,
Yes.
how to understand models, whether these are political,
Hmm.
social models, or whether they are biological models. What all people need is the tools to interpret the world, and to interpret and uh, do good with whatever corner of the world they approach.
Yes.
Mhm. I think, and so I agree that it's just a fatal path and a foolish path to get into some sort of fight with the natural sciences. That is foolish, and it's also foolish historically for the reason I mentioned, which is that we all grew up in the same environment. That the university environment is a quite modern environment, maybe 200 years old at this point, and the sciences, the hard sciences, and the social sciences and the humanities are all products of a modern
Yes.
academic and modern intellectual cultural system. So the antithesis again rests often on this kind of mythic image of the humanities, and also a sentimentalized image. I also think, though, that it's important not to get into some sort of kind of battle with practicality. In other words, I think that one doesn't want to elevate the intrinsic character building qualities of the humanities, whatever you want to call them, over people's legitimate concerns with their futures in a society in which they need to work to earn a living.
Yes.
And so I think that something that is very important is I think, and if we're talking about people pursuing a humanities degree in the here and now, I think that it's very important for people to think in hybrid terms. That it is possible to pursue, let's say, a passionate interest in history or in literature or art history,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
philosophy, but also be building skills that work kind of on the other side of the equation. So, Penn likes to call itself the university founded by Benjamin Franklin. And, the rhetoric around that is, Benjamin Franklin was a very practical man. And so, we have the Wharton School of Business, very prominent school of business. Sometimes I lament its presence because it can distort an undergraduate experience in certain ways. But on the other hand, a lot of these students are genuinely curious, intellectually motivated. They find themselves in classes taught by people like me. And there's a kind of hybridity there that is good. And one can think of, if one is a university administrator, I think what's also an important agenda is to think about ways to really facilitate that hybrid model where one is learning the kinds of, let's call them soft skills that the humanities offer, and at the same time developing, marketable technical skills. And this is relevant to the employment question. Humanities graduates are often not coming straight out of a degree and earning comparable amounts to people in some of the hard sciences. They are also not, earning as much as people in technical fields. Often, although if you look at the statistics, it's really very different from the kind of the story that our culture is telling itself. However, if you go forward several years, what you will find is that the mix of technical skills and these kind of more transferable general skills that come out of a humanities and liberal arts degree, in fact, level that out and statistically surpass the narrowly technical competence of somebody who has received an education in a specific expertise. I think also one has to think about the long game if we're talking about the instrumental or practical dimensions of all of this.
Absolutely. Let me just interject for a moment and address our webinar participants. If any of you have any burning questions that you'd like to pose to Warren and or Karen in the few minutes we have left, don't hesitate to type that question into the Q&A window there, because you might be getting tired of me posing all the questions. But I love speaking to, super interesting and accomplished people. So I could, continue on for quite a long time, but our time is drawing to a close. I did want to ask you a question. We spoke so much earlier about the importance of reading critically and writing well. And I wonder, I work in the field of book publishing, sort of the academic wing of the industry of book publishing. And every few years, there's a new, anxious debate about the future of reading. And the two of you have work with really bright cohorts of young people, undergraduate students. And I wonder what your experience is of their desire to read, of their appetite to read. I mean, are they book readers? Have they been gravitating, in your view, more and more to short form types of reading, or do you still have a lot of students with an appetite for challenging reading?
That's a somewhat complicated question. I think that there have always been students with an appetite for long form, complicated reading. That has not gone away. I do lament the fact that there are fewer such students. They have not disappeared. They absolutely have not disappeared. And that's very encouraging. But students are really finding it difficult, I think, in general, more to sustain reading of a text, a physical text. for hours and hours on end.
Yeah, well, it means you have to put down your phone in
You
order
have
to
to
do
put
that.
down your phone. Yeah. And that's difficult for a lot of students, and not only because they've grown accustomed to the constant stimulation and rapid communication of social media, but because the world is such that they're expected to be accessible. And that makes concentration for long sustained periods very, very difficult and challenging.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
I do think that fewer students are able to concentrate for long periods, but
Hmm.
truly, absolutely, they
Hmm.
haven't disappeared. Every
Yeah.
year,
And
every
Warren,
year.
what has been your experience, Warren?
Oh, absolutely similar to Karen's. I've had, students who are just jaw-droppingly well read. Curiously enough, one of my most recent students, like of that sort, was a contestant on Survivor this past time, and I found myself
Wow.
watching Survivor for the first time in my life because of my student being on, and they played up his nerdiness and his braininess. It was really fun. But anyway, yes, absolutely, there are those students. But I do think that students are finding it harder to sustain that kind of attention and so
Hmm.
forth. And then, it's hard to know how to articulate this without sounding somehow curmudgeonly and conservative. But we are losing common points of reference. It may just be with advancing age and growing knowledge and wisdom. I'll pose the question like, who has read such and such? And people are not reading. And books that are
Yes.
not that esoteric, books that are pretty central to the culture are not on people's kind of radar screen.
Yes.
um, and it can make it very challenging um, to teach because in some ways there is some assumption in education of an incremental building of both skills and knowledge.
Yes.
Right.
And if the kind of accumulation of knowledge is not kind of part of that equation, then it can be very hard to know how to
Yeah.
teach the skills.
Yeah. Well, our time is rapidly drawing to a close. Um, Warren and Karen, our subject this evening is the value of a liberal arts humanities education. It has not been the future of the university-based academic job market. But I can't help but ask you both one question about this, because I wonder if you have particularly bright students in some of your undergraduate classes who show an aptitude for further study at the graduate level, who think about the possibility of becoming like you, professors, and to live the life of the mind in the university. Um, have the difficulties of the academic job market made you pause before encouraging them to go forth and to apply to graduate school? What do you think? Karen, do you want to go first?
Oh, that's a very painful subject. The academic job market, especially in the humanities, certainly especially in English literature, is very, very dire. And first of all, we ask students generally to ensure that they are committing themselves to PhD programs only if they are fervently and ardently committed to it.
Yes.
And but one of the difficulties and real challenges is that even if students are fully funded through their PhD programs, um, if there are not good jobs for them in the academic world to go to, then they are potentially scrambling just to make
Mm-hmm.
ends meet
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
after having lived at near poverty levels through their doctoral programs. And some students have told me, frankly, that, well, they don't they don't have backup. They can't ask their parents to support them if they don't get academic jobs after they finish their PhDs. And it's
Hmm.
very intimidating and very difficult for them to make that leap. It is not the case, as is sometimes said sentimentally, it is not the case that the best students will find an academic job. It's just
Hmm.
not the case. There
Yeah.
has to be a job in your particular field for you to be the best in.
Yes.
And so it is a very difficult time for people who want to pursue PhDs and become academics.
Is it your
Yeah.
experience as well, Warren?
Yeah, so if a undergraduate comes to say this to me, I would like to pursue a PhD. Tell me about how that works, et cetera, et cetera. I always give a kind of cautionary preamble.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I will say, look, it's clear that this is like such an important thing to you, and you are indeed so talented that you should do it.
Hmm.
I do say that, but I think it's a moral responsibility to talk about the realities, and just kind of like the kinds of issues that we've been talking about with an undergraduate degree are now very much extended into graduate training.
Yes.
Namely, certainly in my department of history, we are urging our students from the very beginning of their PhD program to be, in a sense, developing skill sets,
Yes. Yeah.
which extend beyond the skill set involved in writing a dissertation
Yes.
and teaching a class on this or that aspect of
Yes.
history. And obviously, the increasing use of um, big data, digital resources is opening up opportunities in terms of some sort of computer related work. And I've had a number of students who have earned their PhDs and then found themselves as webmasters, librarians. I have
Hmm.
a student who's now an editor at Harvard University Press, so it's in a sense pursuing a similar path to yours. And what's important is that as humanities professors, we present those outcomes as success stories rather than
Yes.
as failed
Yes.
alternatives. Like there, like in other words, there should also be an understanding of a PhD degree as
Yeah.
a mix of the intrinsic love of a field with the exposure to different approaches to study and the possibility of acquiring skills.
Yes.
And otherwise, the job market is just so dire that it really is a dead end for a lot of people if you don't
Yeah.
have a somewhat expanded vision of what you're trying to
Yeah.
accomplish.
Warren and Karen, we have one question that's come through from Glenn, and thank you very much. I think we did address this earlier on in our discussion. Did U of W prepare you well for your chosen careers? And I think the answer is quite clear. It absolutely did.
Mhm.
Um, so
Yes, it did.
listen, thank you very much, Warren and Karen, to you both for your time. I really do appreciate it. It's been a fun hour for me. And I want to thank everyone who tuned in to this webinar. Before we sign off this evening, I did want to remind everyone that we have another event in our U of W alumni webinar speaker series on Thursday, February the 22nd at 7 p.m. Winnipeg time, Central Time. I will be conducting a discussion with three very interesting young people who are recent recipients of the relatively new McCall-McBain scholarship that is taken up at McGill University. So if there are any friends of the recipients out there who would like to tune in, relatives, other members of the alumni pool, please join us. We'll have fun. So thank you again. So Karen Wiseman, I believe that you are getting on a plane and flying to Winnipeg tomorrow. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I
Yeah.
wish it were for a happier purpose, but
Mhm.
the mother of the mother of a relative has passed away, and so I am
I'm so sorry to hear that.
coming into
And
Winnipeg,
yeah,
but it's always a treat all the same to
right.
visit
I think
Winnipeg.
it's a bit chilly in the city right now, is it not?
Oh, please, how quickly they forget.
You
We,
know,
we were all fine in that weather.
the flip side of that, Fred, is Philadelphia is expecting perhaps 2 inches of snow tomorrow, and
Yes,
it's in Celsius. It's
yes,
chilly. It's about -2.
yes,
The schools are closing down.
yes. I know. I
Oh,
wish,
yes. We
You know that
Winnipeggers are very good, and former Winnipeggers are very good at being smug
absolutely,
over how vulnerable everybody
yes,
else in the world is to a little bit of
yeah.
cold.
The
but it's true.
Winnipeggers, the Winnipeggers that we have who are still listening to this webinar will be amused to hear that, yes, a few days ago here in central New Jersey and in Philadelphia, we had 3 or 4 inches of snow, and there had not been any appreciable snowfall for about 2 years prior. And everyone went a bit crazy and the schools closed and everything, you know, but it's just another day of a light dusting in Winnipeg, isn't it? That sort of snowfall.
Absolutely. Yes. One just has to know
Yeah,
how to be hardy and how to dress for the
yeah.
weather.
It gives me mythical bragging rights here in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, Warren must be quite tired because he just conducted 6 hours of instruction, of teaching today, and he's stuck behind at his university campus office to do this webinar with us. So we should let him go. And Karen has to pack, right?
Yes.
And get ready to go to the airport. So I
Yes.
should, why don't I, so I'll just, please drop off when you wish, and I will just hang on and say goodbye and thank you to Evan after you've left. Thank
Thank you
you
very
again.
much for inviting me to this webinar. It's been a lot of fun and I've enjoyed the conversation a lot.
Yeah, likewise, it's been very interesting, and thanks to those participants who have tuned in.
Yes.
Okay, bye bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Thanks very much, Evan.